Are you a Christian or a Christian nationalist? Because contrary to popular belief, you cannot be both. If you focus on the words in red, Christianity at its core is a faith rooted in the radical teachings of love, humility, and compassion modeled by Jesus. It called its followers to serve the poor, welcome the stranger, and speak truth to power. But what has emerged in recent years across the United States under the banner of Christian nationalism bears little resemblance to that message. Instead, it's become a movement that wields religion as a weapon, not to uplift the soul, but to consolidate political power. Christianity requires transformation. It requires inner work that ripples outward. The belief that faith should make people more loving, more forgiving, more aware of their own flaws. Christian nationalism, on the other hand, is about domination. It merges a distorted form of Christianity with a hyper-patriotic vision of America, one in which the nation, not the gospel, becomes sacred. Its message is clear. America belongs to God's chosen, and the rest, the immigrants, the secular, the LGBTQ folks, people of other faiths must fall in line or be cast aside. The roots of Christian nationalism in the United States trace back to the early 20th century, when white evangelicals began to frame political struggles as spiritual battles in the 1950s during the Cold War. In God We Trust was added to the currency, and under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance. A deliberate merging of faith with national identity meant to distinguish America from the godless communists. The blending of religion and patriotism felt harmless at first. Still, it laid the groundwork for something far more sinister. The ideal that to be American is to be Christian, and to be Christian is to embrace a narrow, mostly white conservative worldview of what the U.S. should be. By the late 1970s and 80s, Christian nationalism had found its political muscle. Groups like the Moral Majority, led by Jerry Falwell Sr., and later Focus on the Family, spearheaded by James Dobson, transformed evangelical Christianity into a political bloc. They convinced millions of people that issues like abortion and same-sex marriage and family values, things that Jesus never actually mentioned, were the defining moral crisis of the era. Meanwhile, economic justice, racial conciliation, and compassion for the poor, cornerstones of Jesus' ministry, were quietly pushed into the margins as the religious right grew and politicians learned to speak its language. From Ronald Reagan, City on the Hill imagery, to George Bush's faith-based initiative, Christianity was increasingly repurposed for campaign slogans and political legitimacy. Churches that once preached humility now applauded power. Pews became platforms for political policy. And by the time Donald Trump entered the scene, the groundwork had been laid for the perfect storm. Trump understood one thing better than any modern politician: the emotional currency of grievance. He saw the millions of white Christians felt displaced in a changing America, economically, culturally, and racially. He didn't need to share their faith. He only needed to echo their fears. Trump positioned himself as a savior of Christian America, the only one bold enough to fight the godless left. An evangelical leader hungry for influence anointed him as a modern-day Cyrus, a flawed but chosen vessel of divine will. The irony, of course, is staggering. A faith built on self-sacrifice had been co-opted to defend self-interest. The Prince of Peace teachings had been twisted to justify violence and exclusion. Christian nationalism has replaced the Beatitudes with battle cries, turning pulpits into political war rooms, and ordinary believers, people longing for belonging and moral clarity, have been swept under the illusion that political victory is equivalent to spiritual triumph. But the damage is not irreversible. The path away from Christian nationalism begins with returning to the heart of Christ himself. That means rejecting any theology that sanctifies nationalism or elevates power over love. It means pastors speaking the truth, even when it costs them possibly their life. Followers and believers interrogating their faith traditions, asking whether their primary loyalty lies with Christ or with country. We must also reckon with the deep cultural insecurity that made Christian nationalism so appealing. The fear of the decline of white racial dominance, the loss of privilege, the myth of persecution. Healing those wounds will require empathy and courage, the courage to confront hard truths about race, class, and the way that religion has been used to control rather than liberate. If Christianity is to survive this political captivity, It must once again become what it was always meant to be, a revolution of love. Not the kind that crowns emperors, but the kind that lifts the oppressed, the kind that blesses the meek, not the mighty. Because in the end, the gospel and the empire cannot share the same throne. One will always devour the other, but only one has the power to save. Let's rebuild the city. Ashe.